Hello, welcome back. This is Casey Mo Reacts, and I am continuing to read The Wealth of Nations. And I want to start by saying some things on current events. It is January 9th, and we're seeing something remarkable happening in Iran, which is what appears to be an internal revolution against the Ayatollah, and things are looking pretty bad for the Ayatollah at this point. They shut down the internet, but there's still Starlink, and some reports are still getting out. There's not really any kind of news coverage about this outside of some of the internet sources. The major news things who do not seem to be covering it. Even some of the places where I would normally be able to, like ground news, I try searching on there for stuff, and I'm not finding a lot of things on there. But what I am hearing is that there's is that in some cities they have completely given up on trying to stop the protesters. Uh, in an area bordering Iraq, a general has basically he said, my forces are not going to protect the government, and there's just all sorts of things coming out about pro government people being ambushed uh, by the crowds, which is kind of interesting that they'd be ambushed, because you'd think that they'd be able to tell that there's this big crowd there, but there I would not suggest that there's a lot of competency being demonstrated by the Iranian government in general. And the big driver for this, I mean, there's always been discontent against the mullahs. Iran before the Islamic Revolution was a very modern secular country with a lot of rights, a lot of there you did see things like the hijab, but they were born because people wanted to wear them, not because they were being forced to wear them. So there were, so you would have women in hijabs, and at the same time you'd have women walking around in miniskirts, and this is and so this so since 1979, that has not been the case. But you know what? You know, it's you're not going to get people to really get behind a revolution without a lot of pressure. And what is that pressure? It's almost always going to be some kind of economic uh, pressure, and things have to get pretty damn bad for that to happen. It's I My understanding is that last year uh, the uh, the Iranian currency devalued 70% against the dollar, uh, and I mean they were bombed all to heck by Israel, and then I mean the U.S. bombed as well, although that's more of a show of force than anything really. I mean they targeted the nuclear sites that are deep underground. Nobody in the world except the U.S. has the weapons to hit that kind of target. So, basically we were the only ones who could do that. And we did that, and to show the world, oh yeah, we can fly around the world and bomb you, and that's it. Big show of force. That was the practical outcome of that. But what all of this stuff did was undermine a lot of infrastructure in place. Iran has been going through a very bad drought. I mean, you think, Middle East, desert, stuff like that, but it wasn't always the case. We're talking about, an area that's, includes, the Fertile Crescent. And this has, and Iran is a big country, right? It geographically, it's a big country. So it's not just like, oh, there's this area in the lowlands with the desert and all that. There's mountains, there's forests, there's all this other stuff. What there also is a government that is, like I said, not really all that competent. I mean, they tend to be competent in staying in power. They're very competent in manipulating foreign adversaries. They're very competent at building and maintaining paramilitary structures in other countries that they can use to distract everybody else. They're in fact trying to defend these groups is what got them into trouble. Is what really precipitated all this, I think. I mean, what's the point of having proxies if you just say, "Oh yeah, this is us, and we're going to come in and defend them"? Well, then they're no longer proxies. That's the main point of having proxies is they're not you, and you can't protect, and you can't just say, you, well, once you say they are us and we are going to protect them, then it's no longer they're no longer something that you can say, oh wait, they're doing that bad stuff, not us. And that's really what got them into trouble. And that and that has to do with overall competency. They were very good at strategically positioning themselves. I think for what they have been trying to do, but they don't, but they're not very good at some of the stuff that they really need to be good at, like local economic stuff. They've had sanctions on them forever, and the Revolutionary Guard has been the main benefactors of this because the Revolutionary Guard has been the ones doing all of the officially sanctioned black market smuggling into Iran that allows people to buy iPhones and buy things that they otherwise couldn't buy. And as long as those things were there, as long as they could have the trappings of, participation in the global market, even though the prices were jacked up and all that stuff, as long as that was there, then there was at least that comfort to fall back on. When your money is devalued to the point where nobody else can, where you no longer have access to that, then you start running into problems. And when you have a situation where, in the pursuit of money, you have managed to destabilize your environmental and ecological resources to the point of collapse, then you're also going to have problems. It was the idea was floated a couple months ago that maybe they would abandon Tehran because the capital is not sustainable water wise. And there are some reasons for that. One of them is the dams that they built. They built dams that were not good. They were built in the wrong places. They had the wrong kind of geology around them, and they ended up picking up they ended up basically turning everything being held in the dam by the dam in the reservoirs into salt water, and sometimes saltier than the ocean water. And then this is water that they had to try to use for agriculture and stuff like that. They have drilled wells all over the place and really destroy the water table. So really they don't, and now there's been this big drought. And so they're looking at, their major reservoirs being, 3-4% of capacity. And so they're having major water shortages. This is also impacting their ability to, power generation requires water, agriculture requires water. And what they're trying to grow with what they're trying to grow was cash crops for export, basically. So again, trying to manage your economics with short-term thinking that has ended up devastating their country. And so now they're running out of and the Iranians are not stupid, right? They understand what's going on. They understand the water shortages. They understand why those water shortages exist because they're not stupid. They understand. They knew at the time that this was going to that these dams. Geologists were like, yeah, we never built dams there because we understand these areas are not good for dams because it will destroy the land. And so this is just something that has continued on and on and on. And with the droughts and with the devastation of their war with Israel, which was extremely ill-advised, um, it just horrible timing on everything for uh, and I'm a look, I don't have any sympathy for their government, right? They're horrible. They have been committing atrocities against their own people. They've been committing atrocities uh, against people around the world. Hamas is deeply involved in drug smuggling, especially into Europe. They work closely with cartels in South America. They work closely with the Maduro uh, with Maduro and Chavez before him. They work closely with Brazilian groups. Um, they work very closely with the Russian mafia. They work very closely with everyone bad out there, and and they are responsible for so much suffering around the world. And so this is not. So I'm not trying to say that this is that I feel sorry for them. What I feel sorry for are the people in Iran who have had to go through this and who now have to go through all of the issues and the suffering involved in a revolution against their government and the fallout from that, because who the hell knows what's going to come. We lucked out in this country with George Washington and how good of a man he was. He was not typical at all of revolutionary leaders. And most of them are going to be more on the zealous, turning bloodthirsty kind of end of the spectrum. And that because that's what we've seen over and over and over again. And who the hell knows if what comes out of there is better than what starts now. But I don't know I really don't know what to think of the Shah. He's last time he was in Iran was 1979 as a kid. He I'm pretty sure he's here in the U.S. He's been in the U.S. ever since then, and he sounds like he's a pretty reasonable guy. He's like, my job is more symbolic than anything else, and help and being the figurehead to allow the country to decide what direction they want to go in, and just trying to guide it so that it's not as bad as it was before. Which I hope he's right about that. I hope that that's what he actually intends. I don't know. I don't know much about him. I don't. But what I do know is that at the end of the day, the issues there that led to this situation are economic in nature. And so, when, as I read this Wealth of Nations, this is the impact that not understanding the principles of economics, of not having at least some kind of a coherent long-term view, long-term plan. That more than anything, at least some of the benefit of society of going on, you want to make sure that the people at least get enough of a taste of it, that they don't end up out in the streets like what's going on in Iran. And honestly, like what's going on in Russia, the Kursk Oblast is having protests as well against Putin, because they're eliminating the subsidies for the people who are displaced by during the Ukrainian incursion into Kursk, which Russia made sure that there was absolutely nothing left for anybody there in those areas. And so those people are permanently displaced, and they've been living off of subsidies from the federal government, which is actually funneled through the Oblast government. And the Oblast government is now saying, okay, we can no longer afford this, but they're not saying we can no longer afford this. Instead, they're saying we're taking this away so we can use that money for future economic growth, because they can't deny that they can't admit that they are out of money, that their economy is crashing, that they can't afford to continue functioning anymore. Again, economics. Again, country got into a war that they could not afford to fight. They um uh I I I I I don't know. I don't know. There's so much stuff going on right now that just kind of showcases the importance of people being able to participate at least on some level on the economic uh the economic benefits of society, whatever it is that you're building. If that doesn't happen, then people get upset. And when enough people get upset enough, then you no longer have a functioning government, you no longer have a functioning country, and people are going, and everybody is going to hurt. I mean, at least in the short term. So this is very much on my mind as I'm sitting here watching this, and now I'm gonna go through the I am on chapter 3 of book 1 of The Wealth of Nations, and I'm having to refine my place on the in this chapter 3. And now let's just refresh ourselves. This has been about the division of labor. In chapter 3, the title for that is that the division of labor is limited by the extent of the market. Now, again, what we're doing is we're going through through this book chapter by chapter, looking at where uh, how relevant is this to what we do today? How relevant is this to everything? You know, are there things here that are perhaps superseded by what we've known, or has um, are things still on this kind of trajectory, or we is how much relevance does this have? I mean, I obviously think that this has relevance. It's written in 1776. It's part of it's very optimistic in its outlook. It was written during the Age of Enlightenment, where people were very optimistic about the basic nature of humanity, and of the opinion that given the opportunity, the people who are the best and brightest and the purest of have the purest of intentions will rise to the to the top, because everybody else will recognize their talents and their motivations and how they're just really trying to be the best for everybody, and so that people of goodwill will win out. And we understand that that is not always the case, and that in fact that's often not the case, because systems can be corrupted by wealth and power and petty politics and partisanship and all that. Of course, partisanship was not something that they factored into in our political system, and we'll probably talk about that in a future series on uh I'm going to be going over all sorts of different books that are kind of foundational to our approach to governance in economics and things like that. And and so that's probably a different conversation. But so that this is a fairly it looks like it's a fairly short chapter. So so we'll just I'll just start by reading, and I'll make comments where I think that there's things that I can add. My pronunciations of some of these things may be a bit off. Um, don't know. All right. As it is the power of exchanging that gives occasion to the division of labor, so the extent of this division must always be limited by the extent of that power, or in other words, by the extent of the market. When the market is very small, no person can have any encouragement to dedicate himself entirely to one employment, for want of the power to exchange all that surplus part of the produce of his own labor, which is over and above his own consumption, for such parts of the produce of other men's labor as he has occasion for. So basically, it's saying that in a very small economy, in a small community, there's going to be less division of labor. Um, at least, well, and we see this today in our world. That's not necessarily the case because of the more of the global nature of our economy. which means that it's no longer primarily, people within a small community trading with one another. It's that small community trading with everybody else in their small communities, which still allows for that division of labor despite it being a small community. So the pool of the so the market really is global. That's what that is something that is different from what is being talked about here. There are some sorts of industry, even of the lowest kind, which can be carried on nowhere but in a great town. A porter, for example, can find employment and subsistence in no other place. A village is by much too narrow a sphere for him. Even an ordinary market town is scarce enough to afford him constant occupation. In the lone houses and very small villages, which are scattered about in so desert a country as the Highlands of Scotland, every farmer must be butcher, baker, and brewer for his own family. In such situations, we can scarce expect to find even a smith, a carpenter, or a mason within less than 20 miles of another of the same trade. The scattered families that live at 8 or 10 mile distance from the nearest of them must learn to perform themselves a great number of little pieces of work, for which in more populous countries they would call in the assistance of those workmen. Country workmen are almost everywhere obliged to apply themselves to all the different branches of industry that have so much affinity to one another as to be employed about the same sort of materials. A country carpenter deals in every sort of wood work that is made of wood. A country smith in every sort of work that is made of iron. The former is not only a carpenter, but a joiner, a cabinet maker, and even a carver in wood, as well as a wheelwright, a plowright, a cart and wagon maker. The employments of the latter are still more various. It is impossible there should be such a trade as even that of a nailer in the remote and inland parts of the Highlands of Scotland. Such a workman at the rate of 1,000 nails a day and 300 working days in the year will make 300,000 nails in the year. But in such a situation, it would be impossible to dispose of 1,000, that is, of one day's work in the year. As by means of water carriage, a more extensive market is open to every sort of industry than what land carriage alone can afford him. So it is upon the sea coast and along the banks of navigable rivers that industry of every kind naturally begins to subdivide and improve itself. And it is frequently not till a long time after that those improvements extend themselves to the inland parts of the country. A broad-wheeled wagon attended by 2 men and drawn by 8 horses in about 6 weeks' time carries and brings between London and Edinburgh near 4 ton weight of goods. In about the same time, a ship navigated by 6 or 8 men and sailing between the ports of London and Leith, 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 frequently carries and brings back 200 ton weight of goods. 6 or 8 men, therefore, by the help of water carriage, can carry and bring back in the same time the same quantity of goods between London and Edinburgh as 50 broad-wheeled wagons, attended by 100 men and drawn by 400 horses. Upon 200 tons of goods, therefore, carried by the cheapest land carriage from London to Edinburgh, there must be charged the maintenance of 100 men for 3 weeks, and both the maintenance and what is nearly equal to maintenance, the wear and tear of 400 horses, as well as 50 great wagons. Whereas, upon the same quantity of goods carried by water, there is to be charged only the maintenance of 6 or 8 men, and the wear and tear of a ship of 200 tons burthen, together with the value of superior risk, or the difference of the insurance between land and water carriage. Were there no other communication between those two places, therefore, but by land carriage, as no goods could be transported from one place to the other, except such whose price is very considerable in proportion to their weight, they could carry on but a small part of that commerce which at present subsists between them, and consequently could give but a small part of that encouragement which they at present mutually afford to each other's industry. There could be little or no commerce of any kind between the distant parts of the world. What goods could bear the expense of land carriage between London and Calcutta? Or were there any so precious as to be able to support this expense? With what safety could they be transported through the territories of so many barbarous nations? Those two cities, however, at present carry on a very considerable commerce with each other, and by mutually affording a market, give a good deal of encouragement to each other's industry. So basically, what he's saying, when you break it down, what he's saying is that travel by land is expensive and inefficient uh, compared to commerce by water. And um, and it's interesting this is like the 1700s and he already has a little bit in there on the cost of on the cost of insurance, the difference between the cost of the risk of losing it by water versus by land, which by water was much more common to lose stuff by uh, uh, have a ship go down or something. So that's something that was probably a big economic concern at that point. I think today, Sal, over at what's going on shipping, according to the numbers that he gives, it's about 0.4% of the value of the ship is what's usually paid weekly for insurance. I think that's what he says. Um, uh, if I'm wrong, if I'm misremembering, then just I apologize. But uh, but basically, just 10 years ago, he said it was not. I remember him talking about there about the risks of loss of shipping, and he said it was not uncommon, 10 years ago for there to be a to lose a ship a week or something like that. Nowadays it's maybe once a month, and usually it's some kind of in the ones that I've seen, it's pretty much been you know caused by a fire on board, usually, because with lithium batteries, especially with car carriers, you start getting fires on those, and you're just pretty much done. You just abandon the ship, and that's it, because you can't fight that kind of fire on board a ship. And there's been a little bit of you had you've had the Houthis actually sink a couple ships this past year, and so but that's been a very rare thing. You don't often have ships go down because of bad weather. I mean, you still do from time to time, but not. But usually, those are more local kinds of things, like where the Russians had, I think it was three or four river tankers that were out in the Sea of Azov, because what they do is they bring the river tankers out into the Sea of Azov, and they fill up tankers, ocean-going tankers there. And these ships are not these river tankers aren't rated for stormy seas, even in a small area like the Sea of Azov. So bad weather, um, lack of maintenance, old ships, because I think these ships were like 40 or 50 years old, and they just disintegrated in the in essentially the Black Sea, and just contaminated all sorts of coastline around there. And um, so you still have losses of ships today, but it tends to be something deliberate, like war, or something purely out of like lack of maintenance and basic safe lack of basic disregard for everyone's safety. And as but there's an active safety culture that is meant to counter that, that's meant to keep that at the forefront of everybody's minds. You have to kind of be deliberate in order to run things that way these days. But that didn't used to be the case. And so you used to have a lot of losses by shipping just because of that. So even with those losses, it is still far more economically efficient to move things by ship. So if you had boats or ships that could get to your city, that could get to your area, you could have a much better economy. You could have, you know, you could have You could support more people, and you could not only that, but support more specialties because those people could, because the excess created by them could then be moved to another market. And so you could have regional specializations. All right, so back to this. Since such therefore are the advantages of water carriage, it is natural that the first improvements of air and industry of art and industry should be made where this conveniency opens the whole world for a market to the produce of every sort of labor, and that they should always be much later in extending themselves into the inland parts of the country. The inland parts of the country can for a long time have no other market for the greater part of their goods, but the country which lies round about them and separates them from the sea coast and the great navigable rivers. The extent of the market, therefore, must for a long time be in proportion to the riches and populousness of that country, and therefore their improvement must always be posterior to the improvement of that country. In our North American colonies, the plantations have constantly followed either the seacoast or the banks of the navigable rivers, and have scarce anywhere extended themselves to any considerable distance from both. The nations that, according to the best authenticated history, appear to have been first civilized were those that dwelt round the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. That sea, by far the greatest inlet that is known in the world, having no tides nor consequently any waves, except such as caused by the wind only, was by the smoothness of its surface, as well as by the multitude of its islands and the proximity of its neighboring shores, extremely favorable to the infant navigation of the world. When, from their ignorance of the compass, men were afraid to quit the view of the coast, and from the imperfection of the art of shipbuilding, to abandon themselves to the boisterous waves of the ocean. To pass beyond the Pillars of Hercules, that is, to sail out of the Straits of Gibraltar, was in the ancient world long considered as a most wonderful and dangerous exploit of navigation. It was late before even the Phoenicians and Carthaginians, the most skillful navigators and shipbuilders of those old times, attempted it, and they were for a long time the only nations that did attempt it. So they're focusing on the Mediterranean because that's what they had evidence of at the time. Now we know that the if you want truly ancient civilizations, you're kind of looking at Samaria, you're looking at the Indus River uh, area, you're looking at I think the Yellow River in China. Um, there's but and in these cases you're largely looking at again navigable waters, but navigable waters that are uh, rivers. Um, Rivers are the highway system of the ancient world. But of course, at that point, they didn't see they didn't know the ruins. Of course, back then they didn't know the ruins hidden in the underneath the mounds in the Middle East. So you don't really have um, they're focused on the Mediterranean because that's what they could see. And this really that does not invalidate what this is saying because it applies equally to the navigable rivers of the truly ancient world. Um, of all the countries on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, Egypt seems to have been the first in which either agriculture or manufactures were cultivated and improved to any considerable degree. Upper Egypt extends itself nowhere above a few miles from the Nile, and in Lower Egypt, the great river breaks itself into many different canals, which, with the assistance of little art, seem to have afforded a communication by water carriage, not only between all the great towns, but between all the considerable villages and even to many farmhouses in the country, nearly in the same manner as the Rhine and the Maas do in Holland at present. And I don't know if that's pronounced correctly, M-A-S-E, M-A-E-S-E. I don't. That's a river in Holland, I guess. The extent and easiness of this inland navigation was probably one of the principal causes of the early improvement of Egypt, and this is probably very true. I mean, we talk about the Nile flooding and how it brought sediment to uh, for farmers and stuff, but really the Nile as a navigable river. When they talk about lower and upper Egypt is um, in the highlands, which is actually south, and Lower Egypt is more the river plain approaching the Mediterranean, where it's nice and flat and is flowing through what the Sahara Desert and making that area of it green. And I understand that the Sahara is actually encroaching upon what was just bear with me. The so and we know that the Egyptians actually did have quite a lot of reliance on the Nile. I mean, very very clear in their and basically everything that they did. Even we even know now that they are using hydropower. They're using water power from the uh, uh, from they were taking the blocks for the pyramids were floated into canals, and they're using water pressure to raise them up from inside the central part of the pyramid to it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating, and all of this was because of the water pressure provided by the Nile. Um, had just had so much volume that that uh, that they were able to tap into it in that way. Absolutely, absolutely amazing. And um, uh, the improvements in agriculture and manufacture seem likewise to have been of very great antiquity in the provinces of Bengal and the East Indies and in some of the eastern provinces of China, though the great extent of this antiquity is not authenticated by any histories of whose authority we in this part of the world are well assured. So he's saying that that he knows of other things, but they don't know. He doesn't place much stock in them because he's not aware of how he doesn't have assurances as of whether this is actually true or not. In Bengal, the Ganges and several other great rivers form a great number of navigable canals in the same manner as the Nile does in Egypt. In the eastern provinces of China, too, several great rivers form, by their different branches, a multitude of canals, and by communicating with one another, afford an inland navigation much more extensive than that either of the Nile or the Ganges, or perhaps than both of them put together. It is remarkable that neither the ancient Egyptians, nor the Indians, nor the Chinese encouraged foreign commerce, but all seem to derive their great opulence from this inland navigation. And we know that that is not true. We know today that that is not true, that they all engaged in commerce between themselves. We found ancient Egyptian stuff in 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 the Indus River civilization, and we found, and I would be greatly surprised if it was not found going in the other way. We know that China has always had that. I mean, people have always traded with one another, right? And there are limitations put in place if you don't have oceanic navigation. Trying to trying to move past different watersheds can be very difficult, but you do have the option of for things are of extremely high value, you can move them overseas. The Great Silk Road is a great example of that. Now silk has been around, I want to say, since 3500 BC or something like that. Give me just a second here. Let me look that up. In fact, I'm literally on a computer. I should be able to look this stuff up. So silk origin. Opify. Okay. Because of my lighting situation, I'm kind of in the dark here. And because I'm holding my microphone, I'm doing this with one hand. So, please bear with me. History. Okay. Fourth millennium BCE, according to Wikipedia. So yeah, you're looking at sometime, maybe 3500 or whatever. is the production is when the production of silk originated in Neolithic China. Um, it blah 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 blah. Yeah. So and that's one of those things where people would be more than happy to trade for something like silk, right? It's a very it's a very prestige item. It would be a very um I there are certain things that have always had that kind of value to it that it makes it worth spreading all around. Um, tin, tin, and good bronze alloys. You know that's something that is that's made its way all across continents. Copper is in North America, even without metallurgy, you would have you would have native copper that was that would be spread that would be found all over North and Central America, and you would have obsidian that would find its way. We know that we know that with I attended a brown bag lunch presentation by a graduate student from Purdue University, and he talked about how he was mapping out trade routes in the interior of North America by analyzing the magnetic the magnetism in ceramics, and they were able to actually say, okay, this magnetic field originated in this place in this time, because when you fire ceramics, it resets the clay has iron in it, so you fire it and it resets the alignment of the iron atoms in there along the magnetic field that exists at that time and place. And then that if you have delicate enough equipment, you can detect that. And if you have enough of a map, a well enough developed map of the of magnetic fields across time and space, you can match those signatures up with specific types of places. So you can map where each thing was fired at and when approximately. And it's fascinating. I am very happy to read about it and very happy that I don't have to do it, because my God, that's a kind of painstaking thing that I just would not be good at, I don't think. But it's fascinating that that kind of thing exists, and that we have been able to reconstruct these trade routes across North America by using this. Something that you can't use in a lot of places, because honestly, North America and especially the U.S. and Western Europe are the two areas of the world that are really well mapped out in this way. It would be extremely hard to do this in other parts of the world, just because we haven't had that kind of systematic mapping out of everything. There's certainly an amount of bias there, but we can tell that in North America there was all this trade involving these small quantities of prestige items from one place to another, and we know that that happened along rivers, and it also happened between watersheds, but we also are able to pinpoint where those kinds of right where those took place and how, which it's just absolutely fascinating. So, shoot, I'm just all over the place tonight, aren't I? But that's the problem with me trying to do something like this because I find all this stuff really fascinating, and none of that has and all of that basically is just more support for what he is saying. All the inland parts of Africa and all that part of Asia, which lies in the considerable way north of the Euxine and Caspian Seas, EUXINE. Okay, that I have no idea what that is. Let me, okay. Uh, EUXINE. Okay, looks like that is that's another name for the Black Sea. Okay, so from the Black Sea and Caspian Sea north. Okay, which I kind of thought it was, but I like to be as precise as possible when I okay, so so um the Mediterranean and Black Seas in both Europe and Asia and the Gulfs of Arabia, Persia, India, Bengal, and Siam in Asia to carry maritime commerce into the interior parts of that great continent, and the great rivers of Africa are at too great a distance from one another to give occasion to any considerable inland navigation. Now, one of the things about Africa that most people don't recognize is just how goddamn huge that continent is. You don't get a good sense of it from the Mercator projection maps that we see here. It's an absolutely huge place, and there is some truth to the great rivers of Africa are too great a distance from one another to give occasion to any considerable inland navigation. I mean, yes, you can still do it, but it's hard to do. That's why the you don't see like empires that span a considerable area of Africa the way that you do Europe or Asia. Um, it's just a matter of geography, which and geography definitely impacts how people interact and it impacts trade. One of the things about if you can trade with somebody, you can also invade them. So that also kind of limits how well you can move your military to do stuff. Um, so if it's hard to trade between two countries, it's also going to be hard to attack them. Um, the commerce besides which any nation can carry on by means of a river which does not break itself into any great number of branches or canals, and which runs into another territory before it reaches the sea, can never be very considerable, because it is always in the power of the nations who possess that other territory to obstruct the communication between the upper country and the sea. The navigation of the Danube is of very little use to the different states of Bavaria, Austria, and Hungary in comparison of what it would be if any of them possessed the whole of its course till it falls into the Black Sea. And of course, at that point, Bavaria was a separate country. Okay, a separate is God. How do I? Okay, Holy Roman Empire is a whole thing. This is again. This is written in the 1776. I don't even know what the state of Bavaria was at that point. Uh, man, um, things can get things get very hectic very quickly in history. So basically, what he's saying is that when you have a large amount of trade, you have much more opportunities for specialization, for division of labor, because along those waterways, wherever your ships can get to, is part of your market. And the larger the market, the more specialized, the more specialized the labor can be. And that's true. I have absolutely no concern with that whatsoever. Um, I'm going to I'm going to try something here. Um, got a lot of people raising money for like Ukraine and stuff, and that's important. I donate to pro Ukrainian stuff, but there's also, I think, going to be a need for some other things as well. And I would like to see if we can do something with this. Um, I'm going to put some on my Patreon. Link for that is below. Casey Reacts is the name of the Patreon. I'm going to have some options there for donating to specifically to Syria or Iran, assuming the Iran thing happens. Kind of a stabilization effort where basically we find specific projects that we can help fund. We can put money towards. I'm just thinking about that right now because this is, you know, we're talking about economics, right? We're talking about economics and the importance of economics and stability to the how much that benefits the people of a country. And that's something um that that we can do as individuals is we can come together to help people kind of participate in that. Um, it it's kind of it's hard because in order for that to be effective, there has to be a system in place where you don't really have a where you can be fairly confident that the money will actually get to where it's supposed to go and do what it's supposed to do. And there's a lot of places where you just don't have that. Um, one of the reasons why the Ukrainian fundraisers happen is because there are third party intermediaries that make sure that the that stuff that specific things get purchased and delivered for specific units. Um, so that if somebody is trying to do the whole corruption thing, it's at least not with those funds. And I don't really have a network for that to help out with this, but I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about it. I'm kind of been in the meantime, if you go to my Patreon, um, one of the things that I am doing is affordable housing in this country. And and I have a plan to leverage this excess in ways that benefit people that otherwise wouldn't see a benefit of it. One one of my driving motivations is I see all these people sitting on street corners, and I know people who have been in that position where they were, you know, that was their life for a while. And a lot of times it actually is a choice that's made, a choice to kind of drop out of whatever of participation because they have participated and they get no benefit from it, right? They tried working and doing all sorts of stuff and nothing ever worked. They never really saw any benefit from it. You know, if you can go do that and kind of be your own boss and you know, get enough money on it to, you know, keep going for another week or whatever. That they see that as no real difference in what than the kind of life that they were having before, except there it was, you know, having a boss and stuff. And I can understand that. I can definitely understand that. So, how do you leverage what is in here? How do you leverage this in a way to benefit people that aren't who aren't typically able to participate in it? And my idea is is we take money, we put it into we put it into index fund, into mutual fund or whatever. We and that money, the profits from that go toward our go toward defraying the cost of housing for people who are low income. And the way we do that is by buying a property. And here are the current numbers. If you are working a minimum wage job in Missouri, and actually minimum wage just went up to $15. I'm going to do the math here. $15 times 0.25, because you can generally you budget a quarter of your income for housing. So that's $3.75 an hour times 40 hours times, just for easy math, 4 weeks. That's $600 a month. Now that's actually more than it was before the first of the year, because minimum wage was 13, I think, or something like that. So at that point it was more like $450-$500 a month. And when you look at let's say you have a place that costs under $50,000 and you're renting it out. As a rental unit, you don't get the homestead tax benefit, and you pay commercial insurance because it's not your personal residence. And those two things, if you take it out to on a monthly basis, come to around $450 to $500 a month, just for those two elements. So basically, somebody on minimum wage, and far more people work on minimum wage than should be, because that's what people are willing to pay them. That's, you know, basically you're not going to be able to afford rent on that, because the landlord has to pay more than that amount. But what if you had a separate fund for investments, and the money from the investments pays off that insurance and that property tax every year? Suddenly you can, and let's say you pay cash for the real estate. So there's no mortgage, and the taxes and the insurance on it are covered uh, by this investment fund. Suddenly suddenly you're able to charge an affordable amount of rent for most people, and you're using the power of the market to help do that. And suddenly, and that allows people to, get a taste of, to start to see some kind of a benefit from this enormous economic system we built. And that's what's kind of behind my affordable housing initiative, which definitely, if you contribute to my Patreon, that is where that money goes. The money made from this, the money made from my other YouTube channel, the money made from my oh from my whatchamacallit, eBay store. All of this goes into an investment account that I have at my bank, that uh and that is held by my company. It's a business investment thing, and that's where um that's how that money is going to be used once I have enough money saved up to put that into action. So anyway, that's kind of where things are. And yeah, this was a short chapter, so I threw in a bunch of other stuff. And thank you for joining me. And I hope that if you found this useful, if you think that other people should see this, go ahead and subscribe, like, drop a comment, tell me what's good, what's not good, and I will talk with you next time. Bye.